Hey everybody, I'm JP. At a podcast. It's called Who Dares Wins with JP. And like I said in my short video yesterday on my way to physical therapy, and everything is going really well. I'm recovering very well. Just want to take some time to make this short video. As I said that I would make a video every single Monday going forward, but I wasn't able to make a video last Monday, and so I'm making it now. Yeah, so I'm JP. Podcast is called Who Dares Wins with JP, and it's available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. And I just wanted to say thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch, for viewing it on TikTok and Instagram, among other places, and Facebook. What I wanted to talk to you about today is that in 2016, I read this book called Hillbilly Elegy by a guy named JD Vance. If you don't know who JD Vance is the current senator for Ohio. He's from Middletown, Ohio, or as a lot of people understand, or he describes in his book Hillbilly Elegy, the Rust Belt of Ohio. So like, we're talking about like extreme poverty, and not just with white folks, but with black folks and like just people in general. A lot of people experiencing deep poverty, especially at the time of writing of that memoir. It's a book, but it's like a memoir. And the memoir is, man, it was around about 6 months before Trump was elected president. And at the time of the reading, I was in a class called Black Lives Matter Theology at New York Theological Seminary. And while a student at New York Theological Seminary, my main focus and sort of trajectory was understanding racism in America, understanding the history of racism in America, and trying to think of ways to understand the rhetoric of the right or the far right. Or at the time, I would say people that I would describe as racist, or people who support policies that, to me, support systemic racism. And as I studied in that class, we learned from, obviously, Martin Luther King. We learned from Malcolm X, of course. We learned from William Wilberforce. No, another person. I forgot. But he was principal in ending slavery, I believe, in England, if I'm correct. But we were reading a lot of different books. We read The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander. We read a lot of books. And New York Theological Seminary was a more progressive, like what you would say is like liberal theology. So very, very much focused on justice, very much focused on justice, and yeah, just like, being God's hands and feet in the earth, being Jesus's hands and feet. New York Theological Seminary was also multidisciplinary or ecumenical, in the sense of we had a track for those who wanted to study Islam. We had a track for those who wanted to study Buddhism. We had a track for those who wanted to study Hinduism, and the various Abrahamic traditions. We had students that were conservative. We had a good amount of students that were liberal, and we had a good amount of students that were like what we would say radical. I, at the time, would consider myself a radical, and so in that class, we were given a task to have a conversation with our family members, to try and understand where they're at politically, to understand where they're at ideologically and sociologically. What is their makeup? What is their sort of modus operandi when it comes to politics and it comes to voting? And so one of the things that I did at the end of that class was that I studied out, or I asked questions to my family, and I was surprised. I was surprised that many of my family members had distinct perspectives, and they were not all homogenous. They didn't all agree They all had their own distinct beliefs and ways of going about understanding our country and our history. And if you didn't know this, obviously, if you're younger and you're watching this, like, we're a young country. We are not a country that's been around for a long time, but ultimately we have been a successful country in a short time. Yes, many will say we're a successful country because of our guns, because of our weapons manufacturing and military industrial complex. Our presence is all over the world. Yeah, and I agree. I agree. And then there's different arguments. Some people would argue that that's a good thing, and other people would argue that's not a good thing. As a Christian, I think that's between you and God. I think, yeah, I mean, it is really hard. It's really hard. I feel like it's you want to be as close to Jesus as possible. So, yeah. So as I was doing that assignment, getting back on track, as I was doing that assignment, I was shocked to learn that some of my family considered themselves independents. Some considered themselves Republican. Some considered themselves Democratic. Some considered themselves unaffiliated and weren't going to vote. I myself at the time was a registered independent, and I tend to vote green. I would tend to vote for the Green Party. Like, going back, I don't remember her name, but she had like 0.0 like 0.07% of the vote when she ran for president. But I really felt that part of what democracy is being able to have faith and have confidence in the choice that you would like to see as your representative. I think in some ways that was a very emotional decision, not necessarily maybe the wisest decision, but I also thought it was a great decision, and it was the appropriate decision for me at the time. Some would say it was a wasted vote. You want to vote between the two. Like, you want to vote for someone who's actually going to win or not. My dad was very much like that. Like, he would see what was going on in the political landscape, and then he'd vote for who he thought was going to win. So, which is like very interesting. He's like, vote for who he thought was going to win, and then vote like a party line the rest of the way. So say he's Republican, he'd vote perhaps Democratic because Bill Clinton was going to win, and then the rest of the way he'd just vote Republican. And that was kind of like, in some ways, how I learned about politics, by watching him and then hearing his discourse. And then I talked with my mom, because my mom and my dad were not together anymore. Like, by the time I got older, they were divorced, and I would listen to how my mom votes, and that would be a discussion between her and my stepfather, and not necessarily the same, but ultimately what I'm getting to is that after doing that assignment, I was shocked, because I had written off my family as being these classical racists that like, honestly, like, I just literally felt like at the time white folks so evil, and that any good in us came through a deconstructing of sort of like this white supremacist, indoctrination or way of thinking. And then over time I learned, like, I was like, wow, it's not that simple. It's really not that simple. And we all have our own stories. We all have our own experiences. But for me personally, I felt like it wasn't that simple. And I think, like, what I also learned too is that, like, as I learned little things, it would make me sway a certain way or sway a different way. And as I learned more, I was like, wow, I really don't know a lot. I don't know a lot. I feel, and I have a sort of like an inference in the situation. Like, I can see things, and it don't have to be spelled out specifically, but I can kind of see through it and make up my own decision. And ultimately, what that led to is that I went back to my professors and I was like, wow, I was shocked. I'm like a jerk. Like I'm kind of like prejudiced or racist or ignorant toward my family. I'm probably this way with people in our country and people in the rest of the world, regardless if I'm left or right, if I'm liberal or conservative. I probably have these blinders on. And then they said, well, there's this book that came out. You should check it out. And I really wanted to understand even more. Is there a voice coming out of like poor white, expression that was counter to the narrative that we were hearing in politics? At the time, like I think Trump was like starting to, he was on this campaign and we just didn't think he had a chance in hell of winning at all. Like it was like laughable. Like it was like, no way. This guy is like literally disrespecting people. Like it's just crazy. No way. We were wrong. This guy wins and he becomes the president. And it was just shocking. It was shocking. But prior to that, I had professors in that class that told me to read Hillbilly Elegy by this guy named JD Vance. And when I read this book, I was so taken back by the book because he's a Marine. He served as a Marine. He was a poor white. I have family members in my family who were rigorous, like poor. And he talks about poverty growing up for him as like a tradition. Like it was something that you handed down to each family member. There was no understanding or idea of what generational wealth is. It didn't make any sense. It seemed kind of like a dream out there, but not for them. And he learned that by having conversations or like going to other parts of Ohio, in especially in Middletown and other areas, he realized that like there were black folks and brown folks and stuff, non-white, right, that had the same type of understanding that they were poor. They're always going to be poor. It's the system. They're very patriotic though. They're like, very, in a way, they were very similar to his own family. And it was like, wait, this doesn't make any sense? And so as I read the book more and more, I started to learn that like his mom had addiction. I have family members in my life. There are members of my family that they're doing well now, but they had like hardcore drug problems. I had members of my family that served in Iraq, that served in Korea, that served at different portions. I have a family member who's I think in Germany right now, with the Navy, and the list continues, right? Because it's commendable to defend your country, to serve. I'm a lot more supportive of it than I used to be, but I don't think that like it's like a done deal. Like, I feel like there's a semicolon on it, right? Like there's more to it, and like more to understanding, more to learning. And so as I read that book, Hillbilly Elegy, I couldn't help but feel like, wow, it was so, it marked me so much and really helped me think about my own family and my own experience. And the main thing that I took away from it was, I think, the thing that conservatives are trying to help us understand, although I think they're talking to a base that already understands. And maybe they're learning how to talk to people that don't get it or who weren't born into wealth. And I think Democrats are like good at helping poor people to feel like, hey, you're okay. We're going to provide programs for you, but not necessarily good at helping you to understand like, hey, you're going to be okay. But there's also these other options out there, and we can actually change our vocation. Like we can actually change our social location in our lives. Like this is not the times of like Thomas Aquinas, where like there's no mobility in society. Like in his time period, which was years ago during like the Middle Dark Ages, like you literally would die where you were born. and you wouldn't move up or move down. Like kind of like a caste system. But now there's mobility and we can change, you know? Like I was a high school dropout, special ed student, learning disability, like in trouble a lot. And then I became a college student and I did really well. And I'm about to finish with my master's degree. And it's just, I had a lot of help, a lot of faith, a lot of hard work, but I had a lot of help. And that is like ultimately what I got from JD's book. In Hillbilly Elegy, this memoir of his life and the experiences of people in Middletown, Ohio, is that he had no idea that even though he served in the military, that there was resources for him, that there was opportunity for him, and that he could significantly change his life if he took advantage of those opportunities. He had people come alongside him and help him understand that you can change your circumstance. You're very smart. You're a hard worker. You're a survivor. You're able to take this and turn it into this. You might be an entrepreneur. You might be a business owner. Like he had experiences when you read this memoir that were like he had nothing, and then he would take what nothing he had and then turn it into something so that he could pay the bills. Over and over, he tried to help his mom get into a program and to get clean and sober. If it wasn't for his grandparents, his grandmother specifically, he wouldn't have been able to do anything than what he's doing now. Right now, we see him as a senator who was chosen as the vice presidential candidate. But years ago, none of that in his mind was possible. He wouldn't even dream of it. He said it the other day on the RNC. So I recommend you read the book. I wrote an article about it. Maybe I'll put it in the description, but I recommend that you read it. It's a very good read. I think it's very important that we understand where people are coming from. And I think like we're actually not as different as some of us think. We're not like, I don't know. Like, I just don't think it's so polar that there is more to us than we think. And I'm looking forward to the DNC, the Democratic National Convention, and hearing what they have to say as well. And I think all of us should be doing that. All of us should face that, like you don't like the party, you should know what they're talking about though. This is who dares wins. I dare you to get informed, learn about it so you can understand where you are in what's happening in our world, locally, globally. It's so important. Politics is very much the way wealthy people talk to each other. It's a way of deciding how the country's gonna be. And I think as Christian, you shouldn't be like one or the other. You should be for Jesus. I'm a Jesus guy, and you should be for Jesus. And that is ultimately what it's about. And if there's anything we can learn from JD Vance, regardless how you feel about him politically, regardless of how you feel about him being with Trump, right? Because he used to be like very anti-Trump. So it's very interesting. I felt the RNC helped us understand that although he had this history in this past, he seemingly has come to a change, has come to an agreement with Trump. And I'm like, what does that mean? Because at the time and through those 4 years, yeah, I mean, it is interesting. So that'll be interesting. But to me, ultimately, what I gathered from it was that that he literally was just trying to say like, hey, we're working together, and the past is the past. We're working into the future, and I definitely would like to hear him speak more on like how he didn't like him and now he is liking him. I'm not sure how he can say it to support himself. That's up to him to figure out. But I'd like to see that more. I think that would help voters, help people. to understand more. And I think it also it helps us to understand why people continue to support Biden, even though Biden seems like he's not doing well. He's not doing well, but he does understand the situation. He does understand the issues, and he understands policies. I can tell. I just know that he understands policy. It's just when he speaks, he's older. He's older, and sadly, it reminds me of my stepfather. My stepfather, before he passed away, he just he was sharp, but he was sick, and he wasn't well. He was developing dementia. He was developing psychosis, and he was at stage 4 Parkinson's. And Parkinson's is so ugly. It'll totally change the one you love. Your father, your husband, your wife, your daughter, whoever it is in your life. Who they start out as with Parkinson's is not who they end up being at the end. It goes through and affects and takes out all the muscles in your body. Ultimately, Parkinson's kills you. And if it doesn't affect you physically, like with the shaking and things, right, with the loss of muscle control, it affects your mind. And so ultimately, when I look at Joe Biden, man, that's what I think. I'm like, wow, Joe, like, you're older, like, you need to retire. But he also seems like he does know what's going on. And we'll see going forward. But I guess, like, on the Republican side, it's interesting to see a young pick, to see someone picked young, who is younger, who represents to the Republican Party, to conservatives, the possible future of the Republican Party. So that's my take. Thank you so much for taking time to watch. I hope you were able to watch. I hope you understood it. If you have any questions, if you want to know more, please let me know. If you'd like for me to go more in depth into the book Hillbilly Elegy by JD Vance, please let me know and I'll do that. Or if you would like to hear more about what I thought of the RNC, I could do that too. But I think ultimately what is important to know is that JD Vance definitely comes from humble beginnings, poverty, addiction, things that affect America big time. And I think he's a good choice. It depends on how they go about it. But he could be a choice that does bring us together. Could be. How you feel about Trump? It's just interesting because I read about JD, and JD seemed, in the book, he seemed really great. Whatever. But that's where we are. In August, we'll have the Democratic National Convention, and I'll be talking more about that. But I'm definitely going to talk about this more and more going into the future. But I just want to get this out there for you so that you can be, I guess, lightly informed a little bit. There's so much people that are better talking about this than me. But that's what I wanted to say. And I thought that it was really important for me as a person who, came from like such a different perspective, a radical perspective, and is just constantly changing and is committed to growth and continue growing and changing over the years. So yeah, I hope you like the content. Please subscribe, please follow, and all of those things. I'll put it all in the description. Thank you so much, and I'll talk to you soon. Take care.